I'm here today with Frank Klepacki, who's composed game soundtracks for some of the biggest publishers in the video game industry, including Westwood Studios, LucasArts, Electronic Arts, Sega, Ubisoft, Disney, SSI, Hasbro, and Virgin Interactive. And he's also the recipient of the PC Game Magazine's Best Game Soundtrack for Command & Conquer Red Alert. Between 2008 and 2011, Frank was also the touring drummer for the Family Stone, which featured Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees and members of Sly and the Family Stone, saxman Jerry Martini, and trumpeter Cynthia Robinson. In addition, Frank's music has been featured on several cable TV shows, as well as on ABC TV, including America's Got Talent, Top Gear, America's Most Wanted, Pawn Stars, and a ton more. Since 2004, Frank has served as the audio director for Petroglyph Games, the developer for Star Wars Empire at War, as composer and sound designer for a wide variety of game genres featuring a wide range of compositional styles. So how you doing today, Frank?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So just to give you a little background, I've been contributing to the podcast for the Space Quest Historian, and I mentioned that we were working together, and he was familiar with your work, and I suggested that we sit down and have a little interview.
Yeah.
And maybe get some new information into the brains of the original Space Quest fans who've been listening to his podcast.
Cool.
So let's kind of start at the beginning. Tell me about yourself. Tell me how you developed an interest in music, and particularly music composition.
Well, I basically started off my first introduction to music was through my parents. They were both musicians, and they were performing constantly and rehearsing at the house, and it was just a way of life for me. I grew up with it. I was always around it, and eventually I started forming my own tastes of things, whether it was my taste in movies and TV and video games and other music that I liked on the radio, and it was just one of those things where that gradual process formed what I decided I wanted to do. I decided I wanted to take on playing an instrument, and I tried out guitar, and it was kind of hard. I was a young kid at the time. I'm trying to make this decision when I'm about 7 or 8 years old.
Right.
And guitar was kind of hard to master. Bass was, a little bit easier, but still kind of tough, And I was like, well, I'm gonna go for drums. That sounds good. Drums, like, just have to beat the crap out of those, right? That's not, how hard can that be? So my parents said, okay, well, we'll get you a drum set for Christmas, but you have to promise to, stay true to taking lessons, once a week
so you did have lessons
for a whole year, yeah. And so I followed through with that, and I just, I really immediately started to love it. When I wasn't working on just the core rudimentary lessons, I was playing along to my favorite songs on the radio.
Oh, cool.
And so I would just pop on a pair of headphones and just play however long I wanted to, and that was fun for me. And I was also developing my ear that way too,
mm-hmm.
In addition to learning the sheet music and all of that. So that was kind of how I really got started, and then eventually learned. Eventually, when I got older, I wanted to learn how to play the other instruments as well.
Did you eventually pick up the guitar?
I did. Keyboards I started with first, actually, and then I gravitated to guitar finally, and bass, and ultimately that came out of a need to communicate with my peers in terms of playing in other bands. I wanted to pursue the idea of writing original music, but as a drummer, I was note challenged.
Right, yeah.
So, trying to describe what I'm hearing in my head to a guitar player or a bass player was very, very tough. So I learned early on that in order for me to do this, I got to actually know, a bit about their instrument and what I'm talking about. So I can say, hey, it's in the key of E. Hey, it goes to G here. The riff is like this,
mm-hmm.
In this kind of rhythm. And so that really spawned that and led me into the idea of composing and wanting to write my own stuff. And of course, I was always a video gamer, so bridging the two together didn't seem unreasonable to me.
So you came from a musical family. What instruments did your folks play?
My dad played guitar.
Okay.
My mom played bass.
Wow.
They both sang.
Cool.
And my mom is multi-talented as well, though. She plays guitar too, and flute, and a little bit of keyboards and percussion, and so she's pretty well rounded in that department. And so yeah, they played in different bands, had their own bands going, and in the Las Vegas area. Previously in Chicago is where they met and were performing prior to moving to Vegas. So
did they move to Vegas to perform on the Strip there?
Well, actually, they moved here just to kind of get a change of pace. They were kind of tired of the old neighborhood in Chicago and wanted to branch out and do something new and different here. So that's really what led them here. And by the time I was 11, I was performing well enough on the drums to start doing it professionally. So I actually
really
substituted for their drummer as a kid.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
My story is a little similar, although my parents weren't professional musicians, but they were musicians. So I can see where it would be natural for you to gain an interest in that for yourself. Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So you did have high school. You were in high school bands and did a little bit of that. Did you ever go to college and get a...
So it's kind of interesting. I was always I was in band in high school, marching band, jazz band, orchestra, all of that stuff, and we had a pop band as well in high school that I performed in. And of course, for me that was like an easy A because
sure, yeah.
I'd already had performing experience since I was 11. So,
since 11, yeah.
So at that time I was just like, oh, easy elective, no problem, But it was fun, and I got to meet, through that I got the opportunity to meet other student musicians that were my age, my age group, and we would often do some side projects together outside of class and jam together and do different bands, and so that was a lot of fun. And I really just kind of skipped the whole college thing and went straight to working in the video game industry at Westwood Studios. While I was still in high school, I actually got my job as a tester over summer break, between being a junior and senior, and that was kind of my first sort of opening my eyes to how video games are made. I was always a fan of the games prior to that and played them and loved them, but then when I got to see the inner workings of it for the first time, I was just like, wow, this is cool. Wow, check this out. This place is awesome. Look at what the artists are doing, and oh, wow, and so I visited like every department, and I just wanted to kind of soak in, what everybody did and how they did it and what their backgrounds were, and it was just fascinating. When it's kind of like watching the behind the scenes of a movie. When you see those specials and stuff, and you see how they're doing special effects and how the actors are positioning themselves for a scene and all of that. Well, to me, that was no different in seeing how a video game is made. Just the respect of you get to witness what people are doing at their desks and the decisions they make in their meetings and that sort of thing. So so that was just sort of my first taste of it, and it wasn't until after I graduated high school that I decided that audio was the way I wanted to go in terms of, possibly pursuing as a job. Mm-hmm. And by then I had sort of a leg up in terms of already having performing experience, already having composition experience. I was writing my own stuff by then. I had been recording my own stuff by then, with 4-track recorders and whatnot, but I'd also been in professional studios and had experience with that too. Yeah. So that, and then I also dove in and started programming my own music into the computer. At the time, I had an old Tandy 1000.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
Which had three voice capability.
Yeah. And a sampling channel, as I recall, too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just used basic code and started putting in note values and durations and made my own songs play back in the thing. So
that was actually the exact same way I did my first computerized music.
Cool. Cool. Yeah. So you know exactly what that's about, and. So by showing that early initiative and that early ability, I was able to go to the audio director at Westwood at the time. His name was Paul Mudra, and I said, hey, I'd love to be helpful to you in any way that I can. I know that I would like to try and pursue something here. I just, wherever you think I fit in and can help you, you let me know. And so he's like, all right. So he gave me sort of a trial period in which to prove myself and see how I would take to the different types of programs and technology that they were working with, and I just sort of gravitated to it naturally and picked it up and was off and running. So after that, I worked at Westwood full time, and that pretty much was my college.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, good learning experiences on the job. You mentioned that you started working with some of the software. Do you remember any of the titles of the software that?
Oh yeah.
The tools that you used to.
The very first thing that he had me start working with was a program called Dr. T on the Amiga.
T.
Yeah.
I didn't have an Amiga, so I'm not familiar with that.
Sure. Yeah. It was it was a sheet music laid out sort of program where you could input the notes on the staff, and select the duration and all of that. And so I was composing like that to start with, and we were working on the first video game that I worked on, which was Dragon Strike for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Ooh.
So I did all of my note entry with that program, and played it back. It was basically I had a bass line, 2 harmony or melody lines I could use, and then I had a white noise drum channel. That was what the NES capabilities were.
I remember, yeah.
Very simple, but it was something I was already familiar with, having worked on the Tandy and having the 3 voices there. I was like, okay, well, this is already what I'm used to. So that was pretty easy to get into to start with, and then from there, we would get that music into the format for the NES and have it played back there, and it was pretty seamless. I moved from working with that over to the PC, and we started using Ad-Lib cards, and Ad-Lib had a program called Visual Composer.
Visual Composer. Right.
Which I started using primarily in that era. And then, they had the instrument maker, too, for generating all your FM synthesis sounds, and creating them how you want them to sound. And Paul showed me the ropes on how to use those programs, and I was, again, just off and running with it and starting to create and compose with the upcoming PC projects after that.
So the Ad-Lib Composer, was that like a sequencer where you actually had a MIDI interface and you could?
Yeah, so it was a piano roll style, MIDI composing program.
So that was your first exposure to a sequencer and being able to.
One of them, yeah. Also around that same time, the very first versions of Cakewalk had come out.
Oh yeah.
And I had tried dabbling with that, but it was all like. It was a little bit complex for me. I mean, it was all DOS based, and you saw all of these number values moving around in real time while you're playing things in and trying to keep track of it. And I was just like, this is kind of weird. And so Visual Composer was a much more easier way of working.
It certainly was created for the consumer level.
And so it was just, I was quicker at it. I was like, okay, I understand this. This is simple. I can lay this out. I can program all my parameters, your volume settings, your tempo changes, your pitch, and all of these things. And so I was like, all right, I like this a lot. I'm going to go with that. So I was off and running with that primarily for the rest of the time period.
Speaking of instrument maker, had you done any synth programming before this?
No, actually, that was my first sort of experiences with that. I enjoyed it. I mean, I knew that I always liked being creative, and I would always choose different sounds carefully if I was working with keyboards and whatnot of what I was trying to go for. But then this sort of opened up a new door for me in terms of, okay, cool, I can mess with all these algorithms and get these crazy sounds, or try to make this sound like a more of a sub bass and make this sound more of like a attacking instrument synth thing, and I can bridge them two together and offset the pitch and make a chorusing effect. And I just started experimenting and having fun with it.
You're talking my language now.
Yeah.
But FM synthesis was unlike any other. It was you were creating a new waveform by stacking operators on top of each other. Did you find that hard? Because many people who have tried to program their own FM synth instruments find it the learning curve to be quite steep.
Yeah, I didn't find it hard. I mean, I grasped it fairly quickly. It was just a thing where, for me, I usually would start with a sound that already existed that was in the ballpark of what I wanted, and then I would alter it from there.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it.
So that was a good way to kind of kick things off and get familiar with what these parameters do, and then from there, then I would get a little bit more more bold and dive in and just start making custom stuff right off the bat. How do I make this sound closer to a distorted guitar? Okay, let's try this. So
which actually wasn't too hard, because the sound waves you end up creating in FM synthesis are very complex.
Yeah. There's a lot you can do with it if you really dive in and learn it. So it was just little by little I would learn a new piece of it that I know what that does now. Now the next time I tackle this, I'll know what to do. A little bit quicker, a little bit easier.
Right. As I recall, Instrument Maker also had a randomize button. Did you ever use that?
I toyed with it, but it never really worked out for me.
Yeah.
Like I would
got
just
some.
it did what it did. It
Yeah.
randomized stuff, and it was not what you wanted. So
Yeah,
I
well-
rarely used it.
I used it a couple times. Well, I used it and succeeded a couple times in creating some very interesting.
Now, if
instruments.
anything, the randomizer came in more in handy for sound effects.
For sound effects, sure.
So if you're using the FM synthesis, sound effects stuff, which we did, then it would be handy for coming up with stuff like that. And then you would say, oh, that sounds close to sort of like this. And then you go and tweak it some more and, offset some different things. And then, okay, now it sounds like that. We'll use that for the magic hit, or whatever.
Yeah. One of the instruments I ended up making by using the randomize button was, you familiar with what a water bell is?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's for those who are listening who don't know what a water bell is, it's a large wine glass shaped glass bell that is with the opening pointing upward, and there's a little bit of water poured in there, and the handle on the bottom is made so that when you strike it with the mallet and you manipulate the bell so it tips on its side, the pitch actually goes down. And I needed an instrument like that on one of my games, and I got one that was way better than I was going for. So
Sure.
that was one place where the randomize
So you hit the
button
jackpot on
hit
that
the jackpot on that one. I think that's the only time I hit the jackpot with the randomize button. But you're right, it was more useful for creating sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
Did you start building up a home studio of MIDI gear when you started moving into the sound department at Westwood?
I did a bit later. So I actually started officially as a full-time composer in 1991.
Okay.
And then it wasn't until about, I want to say around 95 or so that I started actually putting together my first, professional MIDI instruments at home.
So your introduction to creating music and programming synthesizers was done strictly for games. You had that experience
Exactly.
in that genre, where mine is just the opposite. I had stuff at home, and I was programming my own instruments at home, and so when Sierra came calling, I was ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah. I mean, prior to that, my only experience with doing any sort of computer music was programming it myself on the computer, but not actually hooking up any other instruments to it or using any other outside software. So, yeah, Westwood was definitely the place where I got to kind of cut my teeth on that stuff.
The listeners of this podcast are particularly interested in the early days of creating music soundtracks using the synth cards. Less so, I understand, about today, where it's all VSTs and fully orchestrated soundtracks.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a couple questions around that era of your career.
Sure.
What did you like most about creating game soundtracks?
Well, what I liked most about it, I guess, was just that it was so different from everything else. I was coming up with the mentality of, I'm gonna be in a rock band and I'm gonna tour the world and sell 1 million albums, and that was my goal. Had the rock star dream going on.
And who doesn't have that, right?
Yeah. But I really was going for it.
Yeah, you were. Yeah.
And in my early days, I kind of saw this job as something really fun to do to make money until that happened.
Sure, yeah. And a little later on, we'll talk about that era of your life, because there's a really cool story to tell.
So, but so at that time, though, what appealed to me about doing it in the first place was just that I liked the creativity that was behind it. I enjoyed seeing, the process of what it took to make a game. I liked being there to watch it happen, to see the progress of how the game is being made. Once we would get to a new level that was ready to be played, or something that was ready to be tested, or whatever, it was always exciting, because we were always enjoying what we were working on, and being part of a team like that reminded me of what it is to be in a band. You're
Sure.
working with other people that you all have your own parts that you have to play in order to make one thing. you all play different instruments, and you play a song together, or you play a show together. And it's the same thing with, I think, being in a video game team. You know, you all have your specialized areas that you're involved in, whether it's art or design or whatnot. And so, my specialty happens to be audio, so I'm just that component of the big picture. And you know, watching it all, how it came together was fascinating to me, and was a great joy.
And it's like anything collaborative, that the final product is greater than the sum of the parts. It's just magical.
Exactly. And you know, it just made me appreciate even more the games that I played now that I knew what it take to make them, you know.
Yeah, I can totally see that. So what did you like least about doing game soundtracks in those days, and even sound design?
I don't know that there was ever any cons to it. I mean, it was a constant learning process. If anything, it was just challenging because technology changed so rapidly.
Yeah, especially
in
that period.
Especially from system to system. You know, we worked on, you know, every different console. I mean, you know, one day I'm on the NES, the next day I'm on the Sega Genesis, the next day I'm on the PC, the next day I'm on the Super Nintendo, the next day I'm on the TurboGrafx.
Right.
And it's like, man, it's, you know, I mean, of course, I'm exaggerating by saying the next day. It's more like every 6 months. But still, you know, technology was rapidly growing. You know, I mean, there would be another sound card out. You know, so we'd be, you know, used to the Ad-Lib card. Now we have the Sound Blaster card, and now we have the Sound Blaster, you know, 32, and then
the sampled instrument module that you plug in. Sure.
And then we have the Roland MT32 module that we're supporting now, and you know, and all of that good stuff. So it was. That keeping up with that was challenging at the rapid pace more than anything, and I didn't see it as a negative. I just saw it as, oh, okay, well, this is something new I have to learn. We have to support it, and I welcome that. And I just always took everything in stride. If anything, you know, any bumps in the road that's natural and part of game development you run into. I mean, whether it's a technical problem, whether it's, you know, design decisions or creative decisions that, you know, people change their mind, and then you go back and rework your stuff, and you know, there's things like that. But that
never happens. No.
Yeah. And I had to learn that that's part of the process, you know, because at first I was just like, why do I have to redo this again? I already did it. It was fine. And now why are they changing? But you know, you come to understand these things over time, why these decisions are made, and so you roll with it. You know?
Well, I can totally see how being involved in the creative process would have you tied to a creative thing a little more than if you were just, you know, on a loading dock somewhere working hard.
I think as a composer, you know, and as a musician, I mean, you go by your emotion, you go by the feeling you're
getting. Pour your heart into it.
And it's not so much about, you know, the work that you put into it. It's about the initial feeling that it gave you to be inspired to work on it in the first place.
Yeah.
And then to change that just because, you know, somebody says this needs to change.
Yeah.
Now you have to rethink your emotion. You know, and that's hard to do. You know, it's easier to analyze in your head. You know, okay, well, that's one thing, but then to feel it a different way is a whole other thing. Now I've got to remove myself and then reapply myself again, and go back to the drawing board and maybe try a few different things before I get it right. So that was that's something that's a little bit harder to adjust to, I think, in that sense.
It's interesting you should describe it that way. I mean, all of us go through that, but before I got involved at Sierra, the creators of Space Quest were doing Space Quest 3, and they were able to secure the composing services of Bob Stiebenberg, the drummer for Supertramp, and they were constantly sending work back to him saying, no, we didn't quite want it that way, we wanted it this way. And Mark told me that he was a little afraid at first, telling, you know, a professional musician who'd definitely been around the block a few times, no, that's not quite what we had in mind. And and I'm sure Bob had that kind of reaction throughout his entire career. He probably was all used to it by then. But even they were telling this professional, you know, long in the tooth musician, no, we need to do it again.
Well, you know, bottom line is if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. You know, and you know,
and eventually you arrive to that conclusion. And you just work on it again. Sure. So do you think you did a lot of sound design, and you still do it? Do you think being a musician gave you an advantage in creating better sound design than someone who's not a musician?
I think it gives you a different perspective on it, for sure. You know, better is probably subjective to whatever content you're listening to or whoever's approach it is. But You know, I've always viewed sound design as something that can be equally creative as composing, you know, or writing music. I mean, when you think of music, you think in terms of which instruments you're going to put together to make the type of, you know, emotion and type of song that you want. Well, I think of it the same way in sound design. I think of, okay, what components of different sounds am I going to put together to make the one sound that is going to fit this particular thing I'm doing it for, you know?
Sure.
And that's what a lot of it is. A lot of it is mixing things together, and if you don't have it, then go and record it, you know? However, back in those days, we weren't using samples just yet as much. You know, we would maybe, and if we did, it was, you know, very selective as to what we used them for. So a lot of it was, you know, we had to generate either via FM synthesis, or we had to, you know, use whatever tool was available to us to make that happen. And so, you know, it was a creative, a different creative thinking in terms of, you know, you're looking at a bunch of parameters, you know, and how do you arrive at the sound that you want via these parameters versus how we think of it now, which is, you know, okay, well, I'm going to combine this explosion sound with this gun sound with this, you know, rubble going off, you know, in the distance, and that'll create my explosion, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so it's very much more literal how we think of it now versus back then. Back then we had to kind of think out the box a little bit.